In this video, we begin a discussion on Chapter 1, where our overall objectives will be to overview economics, examine a consumer's budget constraint, as well as to examine a firm's production possibilities frontier, where in terms of today's video, we seek to overview economics by considering scarcity, agent problems, markets, aggregate markets, intervention, as well as distinguishing between micro versus macroeconomics. Where to begin? Economics is the study of choice, and is founded upon the following axiom. Agents have an unlimited amount of wants, but a finite quantity of resources, where an agent is a decision maker, a want is something that makes the agent at least as well off, if not strictly better off, and a resource is something used to fulfill a want, where an immediate consequence of this axiom is scarcity, or that is, the lack of resources to satisfy all wants with those resources. Therefore, agents must choose how to use their resources to fulfill wants, where the agent types that we will primarily be interested in are consumers as well as firms. Where, beginning with our consumer agent, this agent has wants in the form of leisure time as well as consuming goods and services, whilst their resources will be income and time. Formally, we can state their problem as maximizing utility, subject to the budget constraints, or in other words, the consumer chooses to use their resources of income and time to make themselves the best off possible in terms of engaging in leisure time as well as consuming goods and services, where they will demand goods and services and supply labor as a result. In terms of our second agent type, we have firms, where this agent will have wants in the form of profits and have resources in the form of the factors of production, where formally their problem is to maximize profits subject to the production constraints, or in other words, the firm tries to make themselves the best off possible in the form of their wants of profits based upon how well they can transform resources into goods and services, where their resources are the factors of production, where they will supply goods and services and demand labor. Now briefly, defining the factors of production can be done as resource inputs used to produce goods and services, where the factors of production will include land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now, in terms of our two agent types, when they interact, the result will generate a market, or in other words, institutions that bring buyers and sellers together, where through the market mechanism, consumers and firms will respond to price as a signaling device for desired output levels, where when our two agent types interact for a particular good or service, the result will generate us a product market in which the price of that good as well as the quantity level of that good can be determined. Whereas if our two agent types of consumers and firms interact for a factor of production such as labor, the result will generate us a factor market, where in this case, since it's labor, a labor market, and we can see how the wage rate as well as the quantity of labor hours are determined. Additionally, by looking at the sum of interactions between our agent types of consumers and firms for goods and services or a particular factor of production, we can look at aggregate markets, or in other words, the overall behavior of buyers and sellers for products or a factor of production. That is, the overall market for goods and services in a particular country, or the overall market for labor if we looked at the factor of production of labor. Focusing on the market for all goods and services, this generates us the aggregate product market, in which we can examine how the typical costs for goods are determined, as well as the amount of output that country is producing, as well as how well they are utilizing their resources in terms of does unemployment exist. With this in mind, in terms of markets and aggregate markets, sometimes these interactions between buyers and sellers produces less than favorable outcomes. So in other words, we say that market failure exists, which we can define as an imperfection in the market mechanism that prevents optimal outcomes, such that the government may seek to intervene to improve market outcomes. Where, if we take the case of the aggregate product market, if the aggregate product market of a country is underperforming due to a natural disaster or a pandemic, the government may step in the form of fiscal or monetary policy to restore the output of the country as well as resource utilization rates and change the typical cost of goods and services. But something to keep in mind, though, is just because the government intervenes doesn't mean it will always alleviate market failure. Just like markets failing, sometimes the government may fail with their intervention as a result too, which we can define as government failure. That is, government intervention that fails to improve economic outcomes. With that in mind, lastly, let us now distinguish between micro versus macroeconomics. Economics is overall the study of choice, whereas microeconomics is going to be the study of individual level decision making, or that is the study of individual consumer, firm, or market problems, whereas macroeconomics is going to concern itself with aggregate level decision making, or the study of aggregate consumer, firm, or market problems.